Hello, Rabbi Fischer. It's nice to host you here. I wanted to start with a question. Can you explain how did the Reform Judaism begin?
Reform Judaism actually began about 200 years ago in 1815 in Hamburg, Germany. There were a group of Jews in Germany who just wanted to, they felt it would bring an end to anti-Semitism in Germany in the 1800s if they would form or reform Judaism to be more like Christianity, Protestant Christianity. So they formed something called the Hamburg Temple. And by the way, they called it temple rather than synagogue or shul, because they were saying that we no longer want to be in a temple, a Beit HaMikdash in Jerusalem, Yerushalayim. Rather, Hamburg, this will be our temple to replace any future temple in Israel. And they started reforms. What kind of reforms? Well, since they felt they could stop anti-Semitism if their Judaism would be closer to Christianity, they made their temple closer to a church. They brought in the music of an organ because they saw the churches had organs. They made it that their rabbi would not wear a kippah or other head covering, but instead would wear black robes to be like the black robes of the galach, the komer, the pastors and priests. And they started to make more and more changes. Over the next 20 to 30 years, they kept up reforms. There were more and more reforms as more of these temples started. Some of them moved Shabbat from Yom HaShvi'i to Yom Rishon, so that it should be like the Christians who have the day of rest on Sunday. There were some who made it illegal, forbidden for anyone to walk into the temple with a kippah. They made it, in some cases, even had rules that you're not allowed to kiss the Torah. You know how we put our hand or our siddur to the Torah and kiss it? They said it's not dignified. Christians do not do that to their Bible in their church, so we don't do that. And they made one after another reform whose idea and purpose was to bring an end to anti-Semitism in Germany. And we know how that ended up happening and how that worked out.
How did the Reform Judaism try to change the Jewish relationship to Eretz Israel?
So one of their efforts in trying to bring an end to the anti-Semitism in Germany, which was not only in the 1800s, but German anti-Semitism was going on for 1,000 years. German anti-Semitism, the Crusades, all the Jews that were murdered in Germany during the Crusades, and later on during the Black Death. It was centuries of anti-Semitism. And one of their ideas was that we have to show the Germans that we are loyal only to Germany. Germany is our Israel, or in those days, Palestine. Germany is the land we want, not Palestine. And Berlin, for example, will be our Jerusalem. We don't want to go back to that Jerusalem, to Yerushalayim HaKodesh. And what they did was they separated themselves so much from Israel that even in their prayers, their tefillot, what they did was they did not write brand new tefillot, brand new prayers. Rather, they took the traditional siddur, the traditional Jewish prayer book, and what they did was they simply removed references in the prayers that made references to Yisrael, to Yerushalayim, and also to Mashiach. And so you would find, as an example, in the Pizmon and the Shir Lecha Dodi that we sing at Kabbalat Shabbat, when we bring in Shabbat on Friday evening. They kept some of the paragraphs, but they took out the paragraphs in Lecha Dodi that refer to the hope of a rebuilding of Israel. Mikdash Melech Ir Melucha, the hope that Jerusalem once again will rise up from the ashes of destruction. They took that out. They took out from the Amida, V'liyerushalayim ercha barachamim tashuv. May we return one day to Yerushalayim. May Hashem return to Yerushalayim and rebuild Yerushalayim, Bonei Yerushalayim. They kept the prayers, but took out references to Yerushalayim, to Israel, and to Zionism. They were the original anti-Zionists.
After initially establishing its dominance in America after a century ago, why did Reformed Judaism lose its grip?
In the United States, going into the 1840s, there were only about 25,000 Jews, most who had come from Spain and Portugal in the time of the Inquisitions of the 1490s, and there was what happened was the Jews from the 1490s who left Spain and Portugal, many of them ended up in South America. And then in 1654, 23 of them came up on a little ship, a little boat from South America up to what was then called New Amsterdam, later became New York. So the first Jews were from Spain and Portugal. And then in the 1840s, when there was a new rise in anti-Semitism in Germany, Reformed Jews, Jews from Germany, came in a large number to the United States. And all of a sudden, the United States was made up of had 250,000 Jews. Most of them now were the German Jews, Reformed Jews. In fact, many of them went to Cincinnati, Ohio, the Midwest, what we call the Midwest in the United States, because that city had a lot of German Americans who spoke German. And that's why Reformed Judaism in America really started in Cincinnati, in the middle of nowhere, because they wanted to live among the German Americans. They spoke German. And there was a Reform rabbi, Isaac Mayer Wise, who is the first major Reform rabbi in America. And he put together an English language Siddur, prayer book, should not even be called a Siddur, that he called Minhag America, in which he did the same thing I described. He took regular tefillot and he took out the references to Israel, the references to Yerushalayim. By 1889, the Reform had enough rabbis around America and temples that they had a meeting in Pittsburgh, the famous Pittsburgh Conference, in which they passed the Pittsburgh Platform, a statement of their beliefs, 1889, in which they, among their other beliefs, said they had no wish to return to Israel. Jews have no wish to be back in Israel. Now, this Reformed Judaism started and got its hold in America before the large number of Orthodox Jews started to come from Russia and Poland and Eastern Europe from the period of 1881 to 1914. After Tsar Alexander was assassinated in 1881, the pogroms began in Russia, and Jews had to flee, and more than 3 million Jews, 3.25 million Jews, came to the United States in only 30 years, from 1881 until World War I in 1914. At that time, America closed its borders. When they arrived, many of them did not speak English. They were not prepared for America. They spoke Yiddish. They came from Poland and Russia. And when they arrived, the Reformed Jews from Germany, who already had been here for 50 years and already had established institutions in America, went to work to assimilate these Jews. They took these Jews and assimilated them. They formed an organization in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, which was the main place that the early American Jewish immigrants were coming. And they formed an institution whose goal was to make them less religious. There was a lady who became famous, Minnie Lewis, is the name of this lady. She used to stand and offer children candy if they would let her cut their payot. There was a lady, Julia Richmond, German Jewish lady, who was in charge of the school district, the public schools in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And she made a rule that any child who was heard speaking Yiddish in the hallway of the school, that teachers were required to wash the child's mouth with soap, to teach them not to speak Yiddish. And what they did was they really took advantage, the German reform took advantage that they were here first, and they worked very, very diligently to stop Orthodox Jews coming in from remaining Orthodox and from handing it to their children. Now, as a result, a lot of Orthodox families, the parents held it, but the children lost it for many years. But what happened over the next 50 years is that Reform Judaism found it could not continue. It could not repopulate. There's an expression in America. There's no such thing as a third generation Reform Jew. If someone's a Reform Jew, maybe their child will be a Reform Jew, maybe, but not their grandchild. Either the grandchild, Chalila v'chas, will be lost completely, or will become Baal Tshuva and Shomer Mitzvot, observant of Torah. But they cannot hand it down for 3 generations. So which makes sense, because they're giving their children nothing Jewishly. So the children grow up from Reform with nothing. Those parents have nothing to give their children. It gets lost. By the 1960s, 1970s, 50 years ago, Reform Judaism already was not able to continue its numbers. And at the same time, Orthodox Judaism started to grow in America. There were people who came after the Shoah, who were more frum. There were Rabbanim who came from Eastern Europe and after the Shoah, and they built yeshivot in the United States. Until the 1950s, we did not have many yeshivot in the United States. But in the 1950s and 1960s, as more people with some learning came here, they started yeshiva ketana, they started yeshivot ketanot, elementary schools of yeshiva, yeshiva high schools, places of higher learning, kolelim, and as a result, Torah started to grow in America at the same time that Reform was finding it was unable to continue its numbers. So the numbers that they have are not people, by the 1970s, were not really people who say that they are Reform Jews. Instead, it would be Jews who keep nothing, who know almost nothing Jewishly. And when someone would say to them, "Nu, what kind of Jew are you?" They would say, "Not Orthodox. I guess Reform. I guess Reform." At Yom Kippur, once a year, they come in for 20 minutes or for an hour to the Reform temple. And then they say, "I'm a Reform Jew." But what started to happen is they had nothing left to give.
So has Reform Judaism proven to be a gateway for non-religious Jews to come back to Judaism, or has it been an exit path for Jews to leave?
Reform Judaism thought and said it would save Judaism by taking Jews who are not Shomrei Mitzvot, who are not observing Torah, Reform Judaism said that they were going to save those Jews, at least by keeping them Jewish, by giving them something to connect with. But we now see, after 200 years of Reform Judaism, that it is punkt verkehrt. It is dafka lehefech, just the opposite. That people in Reform Judaism, it's their last step on the way out the door. It leads to feeling that you do not have to eat kasher, you do not have to keep Shabbat, you do not have to learn Torah and mitzvot, or believe in anything. And slowly but surely, we see that it leads ultimately to intermarriage, to marrying Christians and just leaving. You see, 200 years ago, in 1815, they were saying, this is our theory, our prediction, this is what we will accomplish. By 100 years ago, when they were changing people from Eastern Europe and making them less religious, again, they were saying, Reform was saying, we are going to be the gateway to make people stay Jewish. Watch, this is our theory. We're going to bring an end to anti-Semitism in Germany, and we're going to hold on to Jews. Well, this was all their predictions, their theory, but now we look 100, 200 years later and we see the result. Now there's an opportunity to see what Reform Judaism led to. And we see in America, they completely have destroyed both their own community of religion, and they have made a complete mess of American Jewish life. Because through the intermarriage, which is now out of control for Reform, their leader, a Rabbi Rick Jacobs of something called Union of Reform Judaism, the URJ, he made a speech in Louisville, Kentucky, where he told the congregation he spoke to, he said more than half of all Reform Jews in America today are married to non-Jews. More than half of all Reform Jews are married to non-Jews. And we see this everywhere we look. So what has happened is that instead of Reform Judaism bringing Jews in and holding Jews, it has been the last doorway on the way out. And it's leading to the complete loss of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of Jews.
Why did Reform Judaism adopt patrilineal descent, and how has it impacted Reform Judaism itself?
Patrilineal descent means that they say if someone is born to a marriage of a Jewish father and a not Jewish mother, which we know by halakha and by 3,000 years of Judaism, and we know by the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law, the Mishnah, the Talmud, the halakha, we know that a Jew is only the child of a Jewish mother. God forbid a Jewish mother married to a non-Jew, the child still is Jewish from the mother. Reform said they were having such a problem losing Jews. As I was just saying, they lost so many Jews from their temples, and so many were marrying non-Jews. And so much of that intermarriage is Jewish men with non-Jewish women, that they found that the children of so many of these Reform families, al pi halacha, according to Judaism, are not Jewish. And if they're not Jewish, then why should the family, most families in America who join a Reform temple, do not join the temple until their child is almost bar mitzvah age, or the age of bat mitzvah. And what they do is they go to the Reform temple and the Reform rabbi. They say, my boy or my girl is 11 or 12. I want them to have bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah. And the rabbi says, then you have to pay $1,000, $2,000 a year to be a member, demei chevra. You have to be a member of the temple, and then you can pay for the temple school. And the temple school will teach the child for 1 year or 2 years for the bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, which really what they learn at that school is how to read a haftarah. And after a few months of the child being unable to read the haftarah in Hebrew anyway, they just write the haftarah in English letters with a recording of someone singing it. And the child has to memorize a page of English letters for the Hebrew words and memorize the music. Now that brings the temple $1,000, $2,000 a year for demei chevra membership, plus extra money for the school. If the parents are busy marrying non-Jewish women, and the children al pi halacha, according to Judaism, are not Jewish, then the parents will not put their children in the school, and therefore the parents will not join the temple, and therefore the temples were running low on money. It was threatening the finances of Reform Judaism. So a Reform rabbi, Alexander Schindler, who was their leader in the 1970s, he brought forward the idea of patrilineal descent. He said, you know what? We have so many Reformed Jewish men marrying non-Jewish women. Let's just say from now on that the child of a non-Jewish woman is still Jewish as long as the father says they're Jewish. And that way they'll be Jewish. They can have bar mitzvah. The families will continue to be members, and it will take care of our finances. So they created patrilineal descent in order to save Reform Judaism because they were losing the people. And now they have their temples. They have made a terrible mess because their temples include many people who are Jewish, just not Shomrei Mitzvot. Apikorsim, people who don't believe, but they're Jewish. They are Jewish. But it also now includes so many people who are not even Jewish, who are the children of non-Jewish women, or people who went through a conversion, a gior she'eno gior, a conversion that was no conversion, a Reform conversion. There's no mikvah. For many of the men, there's not even a brit milah. In a conversion like that, even the conservative Jews, even the not Orthodox Jews in America who call themselves conservative Jews, even they do not recognize the Reform conversion. When Reform gets angry at Dati'im in Israel, or at the Rabbanut HaReshit, the chief rabbinate in Israel, for not recognizing their phony conversions, they don't even tell you that conservative also does not recognize their conversions, because there's not even mikvah, there's not even brit for many of them. So the patrilineal descent, in other words, saying that someone's Jewish if the father is Jewish, is what Reform did to save their numbers and their finances, but it caused a tremendous problem in American Jewish life.
Mm-hmm. Do Reform rabbis actually conduct intermarriage of Jewish with Christians?
Here's the problem. In order for there to be patrilineal descent, in order for there to be a situation where you have Jewish children from non-Jewish mothers who are being called Jewish because the father says so, that tells you there's an intermarriage, and it tells you there's an intermarriage with a man who still wants to be a Reform, involved with Reform. So how does that happen? The way that happens is because they have Reform rabbis who do those marriages. Almost every Reform rabbi in America almost will do a marriage of a Christian with a Jew. Can you imagine standing under a chuppah saying, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, blessed are you, God, King of the universe, Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, or who made us holy with his mitzvot. Can you imagine a Reform rabbi standing under a chuppah saying brachot in order to make holy, to do kiddushin, to make holy something that is such a chilul, Hashem, chilul mitzvot, something that is a complete disaster. Reform in the United States, they do intermarriage. It's part of what a Reform rabbi does. God forbid they ever should have the opportunity in Israel to have equality, shivyon, with a rabbanut. God forbid what they would do if it ever happened there. Because let me share with you very briefly what they have caused in American Jewish life. I'm a Rav Dati with a Miftah Amerikai. You can hear my resh. Yeah. Now I'm a Rav of an Orthodox. I've been a Rav for more than 30 years. And I have seen what has happened in this country, Artzot Abrit, the United States, in 30 years. Used to be, if a couple would come to me and say, Rav, we are not part of your shul, we don't really go to shul, we don't really keep mitzvot, but we're Jewish, we want to get married, there would still be a chance to say Mazal Tov. There would still be a chance for a Rav like me to sit with them, teach them some Torah, teach them Shabbat, Kashrut, and do the marriage. Teach them Tarat HaMishpacha. But here's what now happens. And this is not only my problem, this is the problem. Every Orthodox Rav in America will tell you the same thing. When someone comes now, they want to get married. If we don't know them already, we don't know what to do with them because we don't even know if they're Jewish. It used to be, of course they're Jewish. They're just Chiloni. They're not religious, but they're Jewish. Now, because of the Hitbolelut and all the Nisu'ei Ta'arovet, because of all the assimilation and the intermarriage, we don't even know when someone comes to us, if we don't already know them and their family, we don't even know if they're Jewish. Maybe it's a child of a non-Jewish woman at a Reform temple. And the Reform rabbi told them 20 years ago, you're Jewish and you have a bar mitzvah, but really they're not Jewish. Maybe they've been through a Reform conversion, which is no conversion at all. No mikvah, no brit for the man. We don't know who they are. So now we have to do a chikur, a drisha, a chakira. We have to do an investigation. Every single time a person comes to get married, every single time a new face shows up at the Bet Knesset, just in our shul. If you have 9 men, it's early Shabbat morning, and in comes a 10th, you don't know, and it's time for Kaddish. It's time for some words, Baruch Hu, something that requires a minyan. You don't even know if this 10th guy is Jewish. And if they come to get married, you don't know if they're Jewish. There's no records. And what they have done, it was not a big problem in the 1970s, but 50 years later today, it is a tremendous mess. We don't know who's Jewish. We do not know who is not Jewish, unless the family already is involved with the Bet Knesset, the shul, and you know them, and you know their parents and their grandparents. And the amount of investigating we now have to do as rabbis in the United States, Rabbanim, it is a terrible, terrible thing. It is out of control.
when Reformed Judaism has had an influence, have they been democratic towards Orthodox Judaism?
I will tell you, it is very interesting. On the one hand, in Israel, Reform Jews are saying, we want equality. All we want is shivyon zchuyot. We just want to have the same rights. Let our rabbis who do intermarriages and who do not believe in the most basic ideas, let them be equal to rabbanim who are datiim. And they make it about shivyon zchuyot. Everything, we just want equal. Let me tell you what happens in America. There was a congregation, an Orthodox shul, Shomrei Mitzvot Datiim, and one Simchat Torah, there was something, they could not use their own building. Their own Bet Knesset was not available. Something came up, and they needed another place to daven, to have their Simchat Torah. So they asked a Reformed temple, can we rent a room in your building in order to have our Simchat Torah, our Hakafot, and our Tefillah? The Reform rabbi said, we will rent you a room, but you are not allowed to have a mechitzah. Not only that the Reformed congregation does, not only they do not have a mechitzah, because they sit men and women together, but if the Orthodox shul would like to rent a different part of the building for their own tefillah and hakafot that night of Simchat Torah, they are not allowed to have a mechitzah, to set up a mechitzah between men and women. That there was actually achifa, imposition, required coercion. They forced the Orthodox not to have a mechitzah. So the Orthodox had to, without a mechitzah, they rented the room, only the men in the room for the tefillah, and the women in the hallway stood in the hallway and had their own hakafot, and could not have the tefillah and could not daven ma'ariv with everyone else because the Reform would not let them have a mechitzah. You see, when Reform has the power and the influence, they take away equal rights from the Orthodox, just as they did 100 years ago when the Orthodox immigrants came from Russia and Poland to the United States. The Reform forced the Orthodox to change and to become. I told you about the lady who cut off the peyot. I told you about the lady who had the children's mouths washed with soap if they spoke Yiddish. That's what Reform does when they have the power. It's not about shivyon zechuyot. Today they say they want equal rights. If they would ever have the power, they would close down the Israeli chief rabbinate. They would close down the institutions of Shmirat HaMitzvot, just as they have done elsewhere.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting, and I think there are many things you said that people in Israel must know, and what we're going towards. And yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, and just one more word, because you said Israel. It's very important to know in Israel that Reform in America is a very, very big problem for those of us who support Israel from the United States. It was in the news that Keren Kayemet Yisrael, the Jewish National Fund, wants to buy certain karkaot in Yehuda and Shomron, in Judea and Samaria, and Reform oppose the Keren Kayemet from buying land in Yehuda v'Shomron. On birthright, there's the famous birthright trips where Sheldon Adelson, Alaf HaShalom, and one or two others helped sponsor a program to bring young Jews after college or college age to visit Israel as their birthright, their bechorah, and Reform complain that these birthright programs are too pro-Israel and do not expose the children, the college students, enough to the Arab claims. There are Reform rabbis who use the temple at their services, their prayers, to make a sermon in which they'll talk and criticize Israel. The leading voices that criticize Israel in American Jewish life are Reform. They criticize Israel. They criticize Jewish rights. They say there has to be a Palestine country with Arafat or Abu Mazen should be the leader. This is what they're worried about. And it's very important to know they were the ones who they were not happy when the United States first said that it was going to move its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. They were the ones not happy when the United States said it would recognize Israeli rights to the Golan, to Ramat HaGolan. They were the ones who were upset when the United States said it would recognize that Yishuvim Yehuda v'Shomron, that Jewish communities in Judea Samaria are legal. So even for Israel in particular, I wanted to add that people should know Reform Judaism is the weakest part of American Jewish life when it comes to supporting Israel.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. B'hatzlacha.